Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
And God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding, his church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
Welcome to another edition of the Q Podcast. I'm Gabe Lyons, and I'm so excited about the season that we're in because with the Q Conference now over, Q 2018, we now move into being able to release some of the talks from Q that for so many of you, I know you haven't been able to hear yet because we have so many thousands of listeners that are tuning into this podcast, and with only room at this latest Q for 1,800 people, there's so many of these talks that we can't wait for you to hear. And so today's talk is no different. It was a talk that we essentially commissioned around the theme of trying to understand what does it look like for us to practice hospitality better in our culture. We know that historically this has been one of the roles the church has played, and it's done such a great job at it. And when the church is at its best, it is hospitable. It's inviting people in. It's inviting the stranger to the table. It's opening our doors, our arms, our families, our churches, and inviting people into these new spaces. And I think in our culture today, people are getting a little more uncomfortable with the stranger. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. Now, if someone's a stranger, there almost seems to be a motivation to say, because they're a stranger, we'll stay away from them, or I'm not sure I can trust them, or what if they hurt me, or what if I don't really know how to get along with them, or what if they think differently than me? And so it's in that kind of a space that we wanted to have a talk that reminded us of how God actually works through strangers, and in fact, many times shows up in these unexpected ways. And so the talk was called Finding God in Unexpected Places. And we invited Krish Kandiah to come and give this talk. Now, Krish lives in the UK. He lives in Oxfordshire with his wife and, get this, 7 children through both birth, fostering, and adoption. Krish is an incredible author. He's a presenter. He just released a book called God is Stranger, Finding God in Unexpected Places. And he really brings like a fresh look on some of these difficult, awkward, and troubling Bible passages that talk about how God uses strangers to actually intervene in circumstances, to remind people of who he is and what he cares for. And in this talk, Krish does the same thing. He just reminds us simply of where God tends to show up. By speaking to this need of orphan care, of what it looks like to care for those children, many of which he's adopted and practiced this in his own community. So he's living this out from a place of conviction, from a place of this being true in his own life. And so I want to invite you in to listen now to Krish Kandiah talk about how we find God in unexpected places.
It's 4:45 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, and the phone rings. It's social services. The office is closing in 15 minutes' time, and they are desperate. Krish, we know you've already got a foster placement with you, but could you possibly take another one? Okay, tell me a little bit more about this child. Well, we can't tell you much. All we can tell you is he's a biter. That is not what you want to hear. Biter. What does he bite? Does he bite stuff? I can cope with him biting stuff. We've got a cat. We've got all sorts of mess all over our furniture. I can cope with him biting stuff. But if he bites people, we're in a different frame, aren't we? I've got 6 other people that live in my house. Is it safe for me to bring this child into my home? And that's when the theological battle begins to kick off. Biter. That is an inadequate description of a human person, isn't it? You and I, we're more than the worst thing that we've ever done, or the worst thing that's ever been done to us. Biter. That doesn't reflect the fact that this child is made in the image of God. And how I treat this child is a reflection of the way that I'm supposed to love the Lord my God with all my heart, soul, and mind. And so in he came. We welcomed him into our home. He was 3 years old. His family were from Nigeria. He had had 8 different homes already in his life. He could barely speak. Is it any wonder why he might bite just to let the world know that he's here and that he matters? When he lived with us, he bit a lot of stuff, mostly sausages and pizza. But he turned our world upside down in all the best ways. This little boy challenged my definition of worship and my understanding of mission. The key verse that helps me understand what kind of worship God actually wants is James chapter 1, verse 27. Maybe you know it. True religion, true worship that God our Father accepts as pure and blameless is a kicking worship band, an amazing organ recital, jazz vespers, beautiful, but not what God asked for. God said the worship that he's looking for is to care for the widow and orphan in their distress. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's the book of James. Martin Luther thought it was a book of straw. So what about the rest of Scripture? Isaiah chapter 1. I discovered recently there's more than one chapter in Isaiah. Isaiah 53 was the only important bit, I thought. Isaiah chapter 1, God says to the church, stop your worship. Stop your meaningless gatherings. Stop lifting your hands up in prayer. Why? Because you've forgotten to contend the cause of the widow and the orphan. Isaiah 58, God says fasting is a waste of time if you're not sharing your food with the hungry and welcoming the stranger. Matthew 25, Jesus' clearest exposition of what the final judgment will be based on. Do you know what? It isn't a theological test. It isn't whether you came forward at the beginning of a Billy Graham event. The test of whether you're in the kingdom or not is whether you've received grace from God and then you've passed it on to the least and the last and the lost. And if you haven't, however well you sing, however many Bible verses you know, God says, away from me, I never knew you. That little boy changed my understanding of mission. I love it that the church is waking up to mission. 30 years ago in the UK, many churches were just doing services for Christians. We were putting on preaching sessions and worship times, maybe a prayer meeting if you're lucky. Now our churches are opening their doors and we're welcoming the needy in. It's a brilliant move forward. But most of our engagement with the poor is to offer them a program. The poor are clients that come and receive counseling or food, and then we send them away. And our participation is to put ourselves on a rota. Maybe for an hour or 2 a week, I do justice, I do mission. But I wonder, how many hours a week was Jesus doing justice and mission? 2 hours on a rota? No. For Jesus, doing justice was not a set of activities, it was an ontology. It was a way of being all the time. I meet amazing foster parents. When are they doing justice ministry? Is it at 2 a.m. in the morning when the baby won't go to sleep? Is it at 7:30 when you're trying to help a child that's been abused know that food is safe to eat? Is it 8:30 when you're at the school gate and you're trying to introduce a new child to the other children in the playground so they might play with them? Is it 11 o'clock in the morning when you get called to the head teacher's office because your child is acting up and you're a terrible parent? Yes, all of the above. Friends, we're called to another level of worship and another level of mission, where we give ourselves to the poor. We welcome those that are in need into our homes as family. I love all my children the same. I have 7 that live in my household. I don't say to those kids, hey, birth children, come down, you're the special ones. Poor children, you can come down for the second sitting. No, I love them all with a passion. And God calls us wherever we're able to open our hearts and our homes to those that are most in need, to get up close and personal, to love the poor as our families, not as a project. I believe if the church steps up on this, this can be a game changer for the way that we relate, firstly to vulnerable children. I believe in fostering and adoption, not because foster carers need money or because adopters need children. No, because we need to step up and be the parents that these children need. This is not about us getting what we want. It's about these kids getting what they need. So we can do it, friends. In America right now, there are 100,000 children in foster care that are ready to be adopted. It will not cost you a single cent to adopt them. All the legal fees are paid for by your government. 100,000, that's on us. The God that says, I want worship by caring for the widow and the orphan, he also sees those 100,000 children waiting for adoption. What does that say about us, the church? These children need homes. If we do it, we'll change their lives. Kids that age out of foster care fall off a cliff. You see them again in your prisons. You see them again in your homeless populations. They are more vulnerable to sexual exploitation. We can make a difference. It'll be the hardest thing you ever do. It'll be the best thing you ever do. Friends, if we do this, I think we need at least one family per church in America to step forward for fostering and adoption, and we meet the need. That would change the church's worship. We offer God what he asked us to give him in the first place. But thirdly, it would change the way the nation thinks about you. Adoption and fostering is politically impeccable. You demonstrate a lived parable of the grace of God to those that are most needy. It's 11 minutes past 4. I've left my phone on a train and a nice person has handed it in at the next station. So this 3-year-old boy called the Biter, he's never been on a train before. And so he comes with me and he does it all wrong. He's standing on the seat. He's got his nose pressed against the window. He's shouting everything he can see. Bus, tree, car, sheep, faster, faster, faster. All the commuters are kind of laughing at him, but they're loving this moment. And I'm having a God moment. I didn't meet God that day in church or in Jerusalem. I met him on a train carriage as I saw this little boy that the world had dismissed as a biter, full of joy and energy and grace. And I want to sing, but I'm British, so I don't. But I remember Zephaniah 3:16 and 17. God rejoices over us with singing. And I want to take delight in this little boy because I know his story. And by the grace of God, I've had the opportunity to play just a small part. Friends, let's step up and give every child that needs it the home that they need. Friends, together we can do it. Thank you.
What a great talk, but what a convicting talk. I mean, I think of some of the thoughts here for us to just sit in and to think about and to reflect on. The idea of the poor being clients that we just serve and then send away, or how we think about this as programs versus just being our lifestyle. And I think as Krish communicates this, it's a call to all of us. It's a call to the church to recognize who God holds the dearest. I think of the Beatitudes and some of our conversations at Q. This year we focused on the Beatitudes and kind of the upside down world and the way that Jesus sees it and the way he calls us to realize that he kind of shows up in the places with those who are underserved, with those who are the meek, with those who maybe it doesn't appear has anything to offer, and yet they truly understand the kingdom of God better than the rich man. And so let's all just be encouraged this week to open our eyes a little bit more, to consider what does it look like for us to care for those who have needs, and not to think of it as a project, not to think of it as just a mission. While there are many great programs and our churches need support, they need volunteerism, they need that. That's a part of how we serve. But what if we took a closer look to say, how is that going to show up in my daily life? How's that showing up every week? How is this just a part of who I am, that part of my interaction, part of my friendships are with people who are different than me, that have a different socioeconomic reality, maybe a different racial reality or ethnic reality. But in general, how do I be a kind of person that can show up in those kinds of spaces where the strangers are those who start to become my friends and start to teach me a lot more about who I am in the eyes of Christ and not just who I think they are in my own eyes? Well, I'd invite you as well to just consider picking up Krish's book, God is Stranger. It's a great book. You know, Andy Crouch wrote the foreword to this book. And if those of you who've been around Q for a while, you know Andy Crouch is kind of a mainstay at Q, always challenging us. And when I read his foreword and knew that him and Krish have been friends for a really long time and started to understand the relationship there and the respect there, I knew this was the kind of book that I'd want people at Q to be aware of and to be thinking about and to consider and to read. So pick up the book, God is Stranger, Finding God in Unexpected Places. Google Krish on YouTube. Listen to some of his talks. Just a fascinating leader that's doing some amazing work in the UK and someone I know all of us can learn from. Well, I hope you have a wonderful week. We look forward to continuing the learning, continue to listen to some of these new talks coming out of Q 2018, and then learning together and hopefully creating some great conversations, some great ideas for each of us to reflect on as we try to be faithful, to stay curious, think well, and advance good.